Well, I didn't hit the intro there. That's my mistake. But guys, welcome back. We have some fantastic news. This is the news that I was hoping for. Danny Masterson will be retried for his crimes against Scientology women. Let me just jump into it. So Tony Ortega reports here. This is the Underground Bunker blog. Danny Masterson will face retrial. For those of you who don't know, Danny Masterson, the actor, born and raised a Scientologist, stood trial last month or so for, and I'm trying to keep this PG-ish, PG-13, for violently attacking several women who were Scientologists. They're no longer Scientologists. And the jury could not come to a unanimous agreement whether to convict or acquit. And that trial ended in a mistrial. Today was the hearing in Los Angeles, the first hearing where we were going to learn whether he was going to be retried, and he is. So this is excellent news. This is excellent news. So let's just see what Tony Ortega had to say about this, because the defense attorneys had filed motions to ask the judge to throw out the charges. And some of the arguments made back and forth on this were quite interesting. So I'm going to skip a lot of this. The court has received on Thursday the defense motion to dismiss with 2 exhibits, with People's Response filed yesterday. She read the pleas. She did her own research. These are essentially notes. There's no cameras allowed in this courtroom. There's no court transcript that gets released immediately. So Tony on this blog publishes his notes from the proceedings. So it's written in the first person, and we'll see what I do with this here. So Mueller is the deputy district attorney. We have discussed this case with our office, and our office has decided to retry this case. Okay, Judge Almeida, I will allow the defense to argue. So Cohen, I'm not going to read all of Cohen's stuff. It's just not that interesting. Only some of it's interesting, and I'll do my best to make this video pretty quick and to distill it all down. So, okay, first he goes, Cohen wants more time and to give the prosecutors more time to go over the motion that that Cohen is the defense attorney, that Cohen had put in to have this thing dismissed. The judge says, denied. We can take care of it today. I've already researched it. I'm ready to go. So if you want to, go forward. Philip Cohen says, I realize the defense is asking the court to do a lot. That's in the interest of justice. The court is in a different position on either side of this, is probably what that says. I want to harken back to one of the jurors in voir dire who said both sides want to win. I've often said that myself. Both sides are vested in and generally believe in their case. The court isn't. The court is an umpire to call balls and strikes. I got to tell you, I always bristle a little bit when the defense attorney sounds like he's condescending and speaking down to this female judge. I can't imagine that sits well with her. Like he's explaining to her what her proper role is. I mean, it always makes me go, yikes. Okay, so Cohen is saying that the prosecution is saying that the jury refused or failed to take into account particular evidence. And I don't think that's the takeaway from the interview. Okay, so I realize I'm kind of all over the place here, guys. So there was an interview that the jury foreman did with Tony Ortega about a week after the mistrial was declared. And in that interview, the jury foreman, here, I'll just do a slightly different view here so you can actually like see me when I'm talking. In that interview, the jury foreman seemed to take the position that, and of course he would, right? Because he was representing the jury and representing, it really did seem that the foreman was representing the portion of the jury who was voting to acquit. You really did get the sense that that's where he was at on it, even though he refused to specifically state that. The jury foreman was essentially saying, we very, very carefully considered all of the evidence. And it's not that we completely dismissed the expert witnesses. It's not that we completely ignored the effect that Scientology had on this. The jury foreman was almost taking a position that he didn't think another jury could possibly come to the same conclusion, which is like, maybe keep your opinions to yourself. I mean, I guess he's got a right to speak his own opinion, but he's certainly not qualified to give an opinion about what another jury might or might not do. He's really only qualified to speak about his own experience on that jury. At least that's my opinion. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments here. By the way, I'm going to try not to ignore the comments. I just realized I didn't have them pulled up. So, okay, I see you guys over there. All right, so carrying on here. He's saying the prosecution is saying that we took that. We already covered that. Judge Almeida was listening to him intently. Cohen is speaking kind of slow and low. He is asking the court to step in and grant his motion. Okay, so Deputy DA Mueller jumps in here. For dismissal in this case, remember, guys, these are notes. It doesn't always read as correctly. For dismissal in this case would simply not be in the interest of justice. I'm not going to go through all the reasons in our response. I do want to address the latter part of Cohen's comments. I disagree with the view of whether the jury did its job, and that's based on the time we had with them in the jury room. I'm not addressing what came out subsequently in an interview. I'm only looking at what they told us in the jury room. I think that makes a lot of sense to me. Who cares what the jurors say afterwards? If the jurors didn't say it to the defense or the prosecution, well, maybe you'd have to ask yourself why. Why didn't they? If the jurors are saying something different to the prosecution and the defense than they are saying to other people afterwards, perhaps the only thing that matters is what they say to the prosecutors and the defense attorneys. All right. I specifically asked them what they thought about some of the corroborating witnesses. The foreman spoke out and said, we did not consider it, that it was just about the victim testimony. Also, that they did not consider the expert testimony. He again said they only looked at what the victims said. Cohen asked about the Scientology evidence, and the jurors said they didn't look at it. All of that, I would say, was a little troubling, that they didn't look at all of the evidence in the case, but chose to disregard much of the evidence. That is not in the interest of justice. Shots fired. Also, some things that were just factually, some things said that were just factually didn't come up in evidence. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what that's supposed to say. We had one juror. Yeah, I don't want to get into all this. I've already read this through, so I know which parts of this are not entirely relevant, at least to the video I'm trying to do here. Okay, Cohen jumps in here. I hate to ask the court to revisit a ruling if Mr. Mueller is going to be based on what all counsel discussed in the jury room, that it was jury misconduct, in failing to even mention pieces of testimony. It was so inconsistent with what the foreman has said publicly, which may be why Mueller wants to ignore the 1.5-hour interview with commentators in this case. But it's also consistent with the discussions that the defense has had with some of the jurors, some of whom reached out to us, that they all had a chance to speak. There was no indication that nothing was off limits. It's not that things were ignored that Mr. Mueller thinks are important. It's that things were discussed and not decided to be important. So that's interesting here. So Mueller, Deputy DA Mueller, is kind of saying we spoke to jurors and it didn't jive with what was mentioned in the interview by the jury foreman after the fact. And Cohen's kind of being like, but we also spoke with jurors and it did jive with what the jury foreman said after the fact. I don't know. It just seems to me that the judge in many ways is really just like, I'm just reminded about like mediating arguments between children is some not to minimize the importance of a trial or a legal case or lawyers, but it very often does have that same flavor of a judge just having to argue between bickering children. But okay, so now Cohen is asking to submit even more affidavits by other jurors. What? And more time to consider this. What the district attorney is saying is not what the jurors are saying in discussions that the defense has had post-trial. Okay, yeah. So, I mean, this is, of course, what a defense attorney is going to do. Delay. All right, so let's see here. Jumping forward. Judge Almeida says both sides are arguing an emotional component. The judge cites case law about how narrow her choices are, and jury opinions are not part of it. Yeah, I mean, look, I'm just a layman. What do I know? I grew up in a cult, you guys. But it seems like what the jurors have to say about the case after the case ends, it should not really be becoming part of whether or not the case should be retried again. Like, but what do I know, guys? I don't know anything. Okay. Cohen. So the jury did its job. The court did its job. Fast forward. Judge Almeida was talking about case law. Fast forward. She's calling Cohen out for having done a shoddy job in referencing some case law. He referenced some case law without referencing some other corresponding very applicable case law. So he's getting a bit of a slap on the hand there. Okay, so check this out. The judge is going through some case law. She is citing cases about a judge's discretion to dismiss a case. And she's reading from a case that says dismissing a criminal complaint is disfavored by the interests of justice. Some of the elements that the case law says a judge could consider are things like, has the defendant been kept in custody this whole time? I'm paraphrasing here. Is the defendant being sentenced in another case? Is the defendant being harassed? And none of these things apply to Danny Masterson. Okay, so she goes on about that a little bit more. So let's see. She does reflect on the jury foreman is only speculating about what future juries might conclude. And the brief also ignores the fact that the jury foreman additionally said in the interview that the district attorney could have presented the case better. Bazinga! That right there is a hugely important point. That even if you didn't like what the jury foreman had to say about some of his opinions on the victim testimony, one thing he did say is that the DA could have presented this case better, and it would have possibly impacted the outcome of the case. I mean, that's all you need right there. That's pretty open and shut. All right, moving on. In addition, the jury foreman's argument is unpersuasive that a future jury would have the same outcome. Yeah, also, who cares what his opinion is? The judge discusses the nature of the crime, the serious violent felony, and that this argues against dismissal. As for incarceration, Masterson has been out on bail, so that weighs against the argument for dismissal. As for the possibility of Masterson being harassed as a defendant, the defendant faces no more harassment in any retrial, and he's not incarcerated, so that weighs against dismissal. So this is also really interesting. Witnesses who did not testify that could be called. Yeah, like half the witnesses were not, half of the witnesses on the witness list were not actually called to testify. That weighs against dismissal. All very interesting stuff. The judge goes, given that, as for dismissal, I decline. Okay, Cohen continues whining and complaining. Okay, so motions for March 6th, moving 402s. A lot of these words, I just don't know what they mean. March 27th. Okay, she tells Masterson that the only date she is ordering him back to court is starting May 29th to start calling jurors. This is absolutely fantastic. You know, Lisa Marie Presley was supposed to testify in this case, and she did not. There were, I won't even try to remember all the other people who didn't testify. But I'll tell you that the Sea Org members, the Scientology Sea Org members who were involved in, I'll say altering evidence, because, you know, one of the Jane Does in this case, she wrote a report about what happened. And yet she wrote the report with the assistance, the mandatory assistance of one of Scientology's Sea Org ethics officers named Julian Schwartz. And Julian Schwartz literally told the Jane Doe what words she was allowed and not allowed to put into the report. And it seems that the fact that this report was not entirely consistent with some of the later interviews this Jane Doe gave to the police after the Jane Doe had left Scientology is something that some of the jurors were holding against this particular Jane Doe. And so when they say that they didn't take any of the Scientology stuff into consideration, one has to wonder if that's part of the things they didn't take into consideration. The fact that Scientology's own involvement in having written the report accounts for some of the inconsistency between the report and the future interviews. So in any case, this is just fantastic news. Scientology criminal Danny Masterson might be held accountable after all. I got a lot more to discuss with you guys today. So if you're not subscribed, please consider doing so. If you are subscribed, maybe hit that notification bell. Sometimes I hear it even works. All right, everyone, thanks for watching. Thanks to everyone who watches until the very end, and I will talk to you soon.
Okay, if you want to see my rock and roll songs, click right on this guitar. And if you want to see a different one of my videos, oh, then you could click right inside here. If you have subscribed or not, subscribe.